Hey there, everybody. I am here today with my daily stream on the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. That's the Biden infrastructure bill that just was signed into law this week. So I'm going to be today talking about some of the provider requirements. This would be the entities that actually get the funds from their states. I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me. I'm Rick Husey here at Z-Quorum, and again, I'm doing these daily streams right now because this is really a big deal for anybody that's in the broadband business. If you are obviously a service provider of some type or thinking about doing that, so you could be an existing service provider like a telephone company, a cable company, maybe a municipality that's also or already offering broadband, or you could be a muni that's not offering it right now. You could be an electric co-op that's not offering it. There's going to be a lot of money that the government is going to make available through the states that can help close the digital divide, which is really the purpose of this bill, and I'll be talking about that today. And today I wanted to talk about specifically some of the service provider requirements as part of that. So you see here again, this is called the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD for short. And this is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That was the big, huge infrastructure bill that was just passed by Congress and then just signed into law by President Biden this past Monday. So here it is Friday. We're talking about this again. So I'll be talking about this every day, just with some stories. And also I'm going through the bill and seeing what's of interest. So I thought this was something we could cover today, would be these requirements for the service providers, basically. So I took the language out of the bill. I was going to try to bring it up on the screen. It is so ugly and so it's such a mess to try to go through that. So I wanted to pull out some specific points here on this. So this would be your subgrantee deployment requirements. So in the bill, they have what's called an eligible entity, and those would be the states, generally the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and then they have territories like the U.S. Virgin Islands and Guam, and there's a couple others in there that are mentioned that also can qualify for this. So this money, unlike other programs, is being allocated directly to the states and not to service providers. It would go to the service providers or these subgrantees by the states. The state is the grantee, and then the subgrantees would be who they're going to grant portions of that money that they get too. So in here, I'm just going to read straight from the bill. So deployment and provision of service requirements, an entity that receives a subgrant, so that would be a service provider, under subsection F1 for the deployment of a broadband network, and providing a broadband service using the network shall provide broadband service at a speed of not less than 100 megabits per second for downloads and 20 megabits per second for uploads. So that's kind of the minimum bar that the service provider has to follow in order to be able to get these funds. They've got to meet that. So the current definition of broadband is 25 by 3. So this is above the current definition of broadband. This is a lot lower than a lot of stakeholders wanted, especially those that are pushing for fiber deployments, because fiber can do so much more, and they want to, if they're in the fiber business, they obviously want to see that they have an advantage there. They do have an advantage because the bill also talks about these broadband networks being able to grow and to scale, and fiber, once you get in the ground, when you get in the ground, you're not going to be limiting yourself to 100 by 20. You might limit yourself to that on a lower speed tier. And in fact, there are tiers that need to be, and I'll show that here in a minute, that need to be for low cost kinds of things or affordable broadband. But you don't need to limit yourself to that. So once you get the fiber in the ground, you can come up with several different tiers, including those that are much higher than this. And then also a latency that's sufficiently low enough to allow reasonably foreseeable real-time interactive applications, and network outages that do not exceed, on average, 48 hours over any 365-day period. So that's the reliable broadband part. So they want to make sure that these networks are fast, low latency, and reliable. So they've got some specifics in here as to what that means. Now, as far as this question of, it says in here, a subgrant under section F1 for the deployment of a broadband network, what that is in here, again, it's kind of hard to find. When you go through the text in this bill, you're trying to find letters and numbers, but what they're talking about there is this where it says F, use of funds. An eligible entity may use grant funds received under this section to competitively award subgrants for unserved service projects and underserved service projects. And unserved service projects are those that do not meet even a 25 by 3 standard. And then underserved are those that don't meet the 100 by 20 standard. So they can use funds for any of those to get to this point. So that's what that means. And again, just continuing on here, because I think, what did it say last? It says, oh yeah, 48 hours over any 365-day period end. So again, we're going to an end. Shall provide access to broadband service to each customer served by the project that desires broadband service. So once they really want this to be broadband everywhere, right? They want everybody to have access to broadband. So if you are going to be providing service in a specific area, you've got to be able to provide it to every single person who wants it in that area. And I would think, we don't know how this is all going to shake out, but I would think that you would be signing up for a geographical area, and that means that in the future, as people were to move into that area, or housing developments would come about in that area, you're going to have to be able to provide broadband to them. Now, obviously, if they're, if it's a greenfield area and they're building condominiums or homes or something like that, there's going to be provisions in there where you have a certain amount of time to get that done. But in general, in areas where there's already people living, you need to be able to, if somebody calls, you need to be able to provide them service in a reasonable amount of time. That doesn't mean like 6 months to build it out. That means, like 10 days or whatever it might be to be able to take the order, get somebody out there and get that provisioned. But again, there will be more details, I'm sure, on that to come. Also, you shall offer not less than one low-cost broadband service option. So again, you can provide whatever speed you want, but there needs to be at least one that's a low-cost option. Now, that's not saying that you have to provide gigabit service at a low cost. It's saying you need at least one option. So maybe that's the 100 by 20, and you sell that at your lowest tier. And that's for eligible subscribers, as those terms are defined in paragraph 5 of this subsection. Shall deploy the broadband network and begin providing broadband service to each customer that desires broadband service not later than 4 years after the date on which the entity receives the subgrant, except that an eligible entity may extend the deadline under the subparagraph if, and then it gives you 3 reasons. So first, 4 years is a pretty good amount of time. So I think what they're saying there is, once you get the money, again, these may be areas that are completely unserved or underserved now. So these are going to require investment. The state's going to dole out the funds, and then the service provider, whoever it is, telephone company, cable company, muni, EMC, independent ISP, whoever is going to take that money and then build out the network. So they have 4 years to do that. And they can extend that, and it says, this is kind of loose here, it gives them a lot of extensions. It says they can extend that if the eligible entity has a plan for use of the grant funds. Okay, well, you could take longer if you have a plan, so I don't know what that means. The construction project is underway, so maybe maybe you don't do anything for 3.5 years and then you start your project. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Or extenuating circumstances require an extension of time to allow the project to be completed. So then you could claim some extenuating circumstance. Now that could be reasonable. Like a tornado comes through the area and knocks down all your infrastructure or something like that. But those first two are kind of funny. So I'm sure there's going to be, I would think there'd be additional caveats around that says you can't wait for 3 years to start your project. These are just the general things that are in the Act. Then there's Section D here. For any project that involves laying fiber optic cables or conduit underground along a roadway, shall include interspersed conduit access points at regular and short intervals. So I think what they're trying to do there is make sure that this conduit can be used, very easily used, and maybe even open to open access for other providers to use. So maybe a city is laying fiber, and maybe there'll be something in here about open access requirements later where others can come in, and if they don't use that same fiber, they get access to the conduit. So whoever lays that conduit maybe give access to others, or that could be for the own service provider, their own needs as far as getting fiber to additional points, maybe to try to reduce the cost of that. May use the subgrant to deploy broadband infrastructure in or through any area required to reach interconnection points or otherwise to ensure the technical feasibility and financial sustainability of a project, providing broadband service to an unserved location, underserved location, or eligible community anchor institution. So I think it's just saying that you can use the subgrant to use those same, to run the fiber through those same intersection points. Once the network has been deployed, shall provide public notice online and through other means of the fact to the locations and areas to which broadband service has been provided, and share the public notice with the eligible entity that awarded the subgrant. So basically, once the service provider has now the network deployed and is ready to use it, ready to provide service to people, obviously public notice, well, I'm sure they're going to want to market the service, right? So they're going to want to send out I don't know what qualifies as a public notice, if they need to put something in some public notice record, or if just marketing the service to the community would suffice for that. They probably want to make sure that everybody in the service area gets notification though. And then they need to let the state know that granted them the funds, hey, we've got the service up and running. G, shall carry out public awareness campaigns in service areas that are designed to highlight the value and benefits of broadband service in order to increase the adoption of broadband service by consumers. So again, those would be marketing efforts, because that's obviously in the best interests of the service provider, assuming that they're a for-profit or even a nonprofit. You still want subscribers, right? So that means, yeah, market your services. But I think also, don't just say, hey, we got a great service and here's how fast it is. It mentions here specifically designed to highlight the value and benefits of broadband service. One of the things that they're trying to address is the fact that broadband adoption is down. So it's not always that there's not broadband everywhere. Sometimes it's that there's broadband there, but people just aren't getting it. It could be because they can't afford it, but it could be because they think I don't really need it. What am I going to do with that? So, or maybe I don't really know how to use it. So they probably want to make sure that some of these service providers are providing ways to get people to understand what the benefits are. Maybe these could be training classes that they provide. Again, it could be part of their marketing efforts. They want to increase adoption. And then H, if the entity is no longer able to provide broadband service to the locations covered by the subgrant at any time, they shall sell the network capacity at a reasonable wholesale rate on a non-discriminatory basis to other broadband service providers or public sector entities. So that would be, rather than just shutting off the lights and going away, you've laid all this infrastructure, you've got money to lay this infrastructure, then you need to sell that at a reasonable price to some other service provider that wants to take that over, a reasonable wholesale rate. So not really trying to make a big profit on that. So that's trying to make sure that, I guess, that any grants that have been made to the states and then made to the subgrantees, that money doesn't go to waste if that service provider is out of business. So if that provider is going out of business, and let's say it's not bankruptcy where that gets taken over, they're just going to shut off the lights, they need to make sure they sell that. And let's go back to this question of low-cost broadband, which was brought up. I wanted to get to this, but this was a little bit further down in paragraph 5. So what is low-cost broadband? It says, an eligible entity shall submit to the Assistant Secretary for approval, and that means the NTIA. Anytime you see Assistant Secretary, you can just put NTIA in there. That's the organization that's managing this, and they just say Assistant Secretary, who is the top person at the NTIA. That would be overseeing these things, but I'm sure they're not going to look at every single proposal that comes in. So they'll submit to the Assistant Secretary for approval, and the final proposal of the eligible entity submitted under subsection blah blah, a proposed definition of low-cost broadband service option that shall apply to subgrantees of the eligible entity. So this would mean the states. So the states have to submit to the NTIA what they are going to say a low-cost broadband solution is. So they're leaving that in the hands of the states to define. And that makes some sense, because they know their local area. They know what is required for low cost in their area, which may be different, let's say, from New York City compared to Oklahoma. Totally different markets and what that means. So the states have control over that as far as they will propose that definition. A proposed definition of low-cost broadband service that shall apply to subgrantees of the eligible entity. So the eligible entity, which is the state, shall then apply this to the service providers or subgrantees that are going to get these funds, and they will then have to operate on what is a low-cost broadband service. And then consultation. An eligible entity shall consult with the Assistant Secretary and prospective subgrantees regarding a proposed definition of low-cost broadband service option before submitting the proposed definition. So they need to consult with the NTIA first, along with the service providers that are in their area that are wanting these funds. So they can't just make a declaration on this is what we want to do with low cost. They need to make sure that the service providers in the area that's something they can work with, and then the NTIA needs to see that and approve that as well. And then here, there's a few other provisions under this low-cost broadband. It says the low-cost option cannot take effect until approved by the NTIA. So they consult with them, but they also have to wait for approval. If not approved, the NTIA will notify the state and what they need to do to correct that. And then the state must publicly disclose their definition of low-cost broadband service. So again, this would be probably on their website or through other methods, maybe through some communication to let people know that this option is available and what that means. So what the speeds are, how much it costs, that kind of thing. And then there's a section on non-performance. So obviously some people may take these funds and then not perform the way that they're supposed to according to the Act. So the NTIA shall develop procedures under which the Assistant Secretary, or NTIA, or an eligible entity may evaluate the compliance of a subgrantee with the requirement under paragraph 4B and take corrective action, including recoupment of funds from the subgrantee for non-compliance with the requirement under paragraph 4B. So basically this is saying if somebody does not perform, if a subgrantee does not perform and they're not providing the service as is required under 4B, and that 4B refers back to the speeds and the latency and that kind of thing. So the 100 by 20 and the low enough latency for interactive service, I forget how I put it, those kinds of things. Then they have to, basically those funds can be recouped. So I think what you're going to see in here, notice it says return of funds, I think, is that in here? An entity that receives a subgrant from an eligible entity under Section F and fails to comply with any requirement under this subsection shall return up to the entire amount of the subgrant to the eligible entity at the discretion of the eligible entity or the Assistant Secretary. So it says it's at the discretion of the state or the Assistant Secretary. So maybe the Assistant Secretary can step in if the state doesn't. And I thought I had it in here, but I don't. But I'm assuming, or one piece of language, I'm assuming what they're saying here, what is the non-performance going to be? Well, there's probably going to be some testing requirements that are going to have to be done and proven. Because I know, and I'm going to talk about this in a future stream, there are going to be some reporting requirements. So the states, I believe it is, going to have to report twice a year on the funds that they have gotten, and then what they're doing with those and who's gotten it. And I'm thinking that the service providers are probably going to have to report back showing what they've deployed, and then also some proof that the speeds that they're promising and the latency that they're promising is actually being delivered. So similar probably to CAF2, the Connect America Fund, and what we're going to be seeing with RDOF, Rural Development Opportunity Fund, those recent federal funds that have been given out to service providers directly. There are testing requirements on there where they have to take a percentage of their subscribers and then run tests to make sure that the speeds are what they're saying they're providing and the latency is what they're saying they're providing. So I think we're probably going to be seeing something similar here under this, although that's not laid out in the Act. I'm sure that will be laid out in the notice that comes from the NTIA, which is supposed to happen sometime in the next 6 months. So there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful for you. If it was, please give me a thumbs up on this video. If you're kind of following this and interested about this broadband infrastructure plan, I'm doing this on a daily basis. If I'm here, if I'm not here, I won't be doing one, but if I'm in the office, I will be doing a stream. So if this was helpful, give me a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, click the subscribe button on YouTube, ring the little bell, and you'll be notified whenever I'm live. And then you'll get a notification that I was streaming. So I do this every day, and then I do once a week, Tech Tuesday. If you're not signed up already, you'll get notifications about that, my weekly Tech Tuesday broadcast. So thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.